Welcome, everyone. That's another exciting topic. We've talked about carbohydrates in general before. We've talked about fat. We've talked about protein. So today I thought this would be an interesting topic because some of you have been asking about healthy dessert options. So I thought, oh, why not talk about sugar and health and see, if there is a sweet spot, how can we find pleasure in eating sweets? As Angie mentioned, God gave us the taste buds and God gave sweet taste in foods for us to enjoy. But at the same time, we have our bodies to take care of. So how can we find a balance? So let me share my screen so we can go ahead and start. Do you guys see my full screen?
Yes.
Yeah, all right, very good.
I love it.
Yes, a beautiful picture. The work was Angie's work to do this beautiful cover here. So let's discuss a few things. First, I'd like to start with a disclaimer that the information on this presentation is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information, is for general information and educational purposes only.
Amen.
So before I start with my question, I'm trying to see here if I can see everybody's face because I have two screens. So let me enlarge here. So if you can raise your hand or the icon hand, how many of you have a sweet tooth? Let me raise both hands.
And your feet too, right?
And my feet too.
I mean mine.
I have a sweet tooth, so I'm gonna try to share some of the tips and things that have helped to tame my sweet tooth and continue to take care of my health. And I see some of you are posting on the chat. I'm gonna try to keep an eye on that too. If I miss anything, if Phil or Angie can let me know if there's a question. Yeah, feel free to ask questions at any time. So let's start with what is sugar. When we say sugar, I think a lot of people automatically think of white sugar or concentrated forms of sugar, but there are different types of sugar. Sugar in and of itself is a basic unit that forms all types of carbohydrates. So it's present in fruits, vegetables, it's present in milk, including human milk. And the name of that sugar in milk is lactose, which I'm sure you guys have heard about. So lactose is a milk, it's a sugar. Sugar is also present in starchy foods. So when you think of starch, starch is none other than many molecules of glucose chained together. So it's a chain of glucose. So when you digest starch, it turns into glucose, which is a sugar. So sugar is going to be part of your grains, your legumes, starchy vegetables, nuts and seeds, and also is going to be in concentrated forms such as, the added sugars we are going to be describing as well. So when you digest any forms of carbohydrates, they are going to end up as the most basic sugar units, which are either glucose, galactose, and fructose. Most people are probably more familiar with glucose, which is fine. That's the main source of energy for our body. So those are the three most basic sugar units that forms all different types of carbohydrates. In terms of the different types of sugar, we can classify them in many different ways. We can look at the chemical structure, but to put in practical terms on how we translate that to our choices, I categorized in the forms that we can recognize more easily in foods. So one of those forms would be the naturally occurring sugars. So those are the sugars that are contained within the cell wall of plants before they've been processed into something like from the food industry. So we're talking about fruits, vegetables, legumes, grains, nuts, and seeds. So the sugar contained within the wall of the cell of those plants, it's what we call naturally occurring sugars. Also, the sugar in milk before it has been processed into, ice cream and other things where they add extra sugar. That sugar called lactose, which is present in any type of animal milk, it's also considered naturally occurring. Then we have added sugars, which refer to sugars and syrups that are added to foods during the processing or preparation. So here are the types of sugar most people think about when we talk about sugar and health. So that would be a white sugar, brown sugar, honey, molasses, maple syrup, coconut sugar, date sugar, high fructose corn syrup, fructose sweetener, agave nectar, dextrose. I mean, there are so many other names. This is just a summary, believe me. In the food industry, oftentimes, as I'm going to show in some examples here, oftentimes they use a combination of several types of added sugars to achieve the texture, the flavor that they are trying to achieve. We also have sugar substitutes, which are also known as non-nutritive, high-intensity sweeteners or artificial sweeteners. So they can be referred by either one of those names. So this type of sugar refers to the sugars that are chemically or physically manipulated by the food industry. And the reason they're called high-intensity sweeteners is because they're many times sweeter than sugar while being zero or low calorie. The FDA has approved the following non-nutritive sweeteners: acesulfame K, advantame, aspartame, monk fruit, neotame, saccharin, sucralose, and stevia. You may or may not recognize these names. How many of you recognize at least some of these artificial sweeteners? Yeah. I have to confess, some of them I had never heard about before. This advantame, has anybody seen any product with this advantame? Yeah, so there are several, things that when you dig in deeper, you find things you never heard before, or these names. But some names here is representing the generic form. Sucralose, for instance, is the Splenda brand that most people are familiar with. Sugar alcohol. Have you guys heard of sugar alcohol before? Yeah. So sugar alcohol is a carbohydrate, which is a hybrid chemical structure that partially looks like sugar, partially looks like alcohol, but it's not the same alcohol in ethanol, the alcoholic beverages. So it's not something that is gonna, have the same impact. So this type of sugar can actually be naturally occurring in fruits and vegetables, but when you see them in processed foods, they have been manipulated by the food industry. The reason why the food industry likes to use this in the processed foods is because these sugars partially resist digestion. So only about half of what is listed of what is used in those foods are going to actually be absorbed into the body. So they use as a way to try to maintain that sweet flavor while keeping the calories lower than, the traditional products. Most of the sugar alcohols, when you read labels and you look at the ingredients, are gonna end with all. So we're talking about sorbitol, mannitol, xylitol, maltitol. Do you guys remember reading these names on labels? Yes. And if you look, if any of you, choose sugar-free gum, you can read the label. You're gonna actually find that you're gonna find many of these sugar alcohols on your sugar-free gum. And this is a tricky part, that the food industry gets to use this type of sugar and list as sugar-free. But when you look at the label, you actually can see that, it still has a significant amount. And even though they get away with listing sugar-free, your body is going to absorb half of what is listed here. So I don't understand why why they have this rule this way. I certainly don't think it's a good idea, because for people with diabetes, especially the ones that need to know how much insulin to inject based on the amount of carbohydrates they consume, this should be an important information for them to know, how much of those sugars they are absorbing. So here is also, you can see those names that I mentioned here. You can find the maltitol. Let's see what else. Yeah, so in this case, that was the main sugar substitute that they use for this product. Also, if you notice from a previous presentation we did on saturated fat is something that we should be striving to limit. And if, as you can see here, this product, 2 pieces of this candy is 32% of your daily value for saturated fat. So it's considered high in saturated fats. This can be equivalent to eating, some types of high fat cheeses, serving by serving comparing. So a lot of people get, confused when they see things that say sugar-free, thinking that is, might be good for me. It's calorie-free too. So it is not calorie-free, and is actually quite high in fat, specifically even worse with the saturated fat. So we need to be mindful of those tricks that the food industry uses. And the more we move towards unprocessed foods, the safer we are. Let's look now at the functions of sugar. So glucose, as I said, one of those basic forms of sugar, once you digest your carbohydrates, that's the primary source of energy to our cells. So this is the only sugar that is essential to our bodies. And we can get it exclusively from naturally occurring sugars. So there is no need to consume added sugars to provide your body with sufficient glucose. Added sugars, on the other hand, they are used not only as sweeteners, to increase the palatability of foods, but also the food industry, like I mentioned before, they use it to achieve certain textures, the body of the product, viscosity, the appearance, because sugars they have the browning capacity, so it makes the products more attractive too. And in some cases, sugar can also be used for food preservation. So let's dig into the health impact of those different types of sugars. So the naturally occurring sugars are the sugars that concentrate more in fruits. What do the studies show? So the studies show that as you consume more fruits, it actually helps to lower your risk for developing type 2 diabetes. And for the study references, you can look at the article that is going to be posted along with the presentation. All the scientific studies, the references are going to be listed in the article. The studies also show that even for individuals who already have diabetes, if they eat more fruit, it helps them prevent diabetes complications, and it lowers their risk of dying from any cause. So fruit has been shown to be beneficial for even individuals with diabetes. Fruit also has anti-obesity properties. So it's something that, even though it's quite high in sugar, is a natural sugar that is bound to a lot of water, a lot of fiber. So even if you look at a banana, for instance, as I was looking at the nutrition composition of a banana, and it's about 75% water. Doesn't seem like it, right? But that certainly dilutes the calories when you compare that to foods with added sugars, without fiber, and without the water. Fruits have also been used in dietary approaches to prevent, manage, or reverse obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and cognitive impairments later in life, which will be conditions like dementia or Alzheimer's disease. And the American Institute for Cancer Research states that fruits lower the risk for many cancers. So there's only benefits from eating fruits, no harmful side effects. Harvard University, they conducted a research looking at the lifestyle habits of 110,000 individuals, followed them for 14 years, and they found that those who eat 8 or more servings of fruits and vegetables per day were 30% less likely to have a heart attack or stroke compared to those who ate less than 1.5 servings per day. And if you're curious to know what a serving of fruit and vegetable is, it should be about the size of your fist, if you can estimate. Okay, so the more, the better. And Angie posted the link for where the article is posted here on the chat too. Added sugars, those are the foods that we all tempted by, right? So the cookies, the candies, the pastry, the baked goods, the frozen desserts. So what does science show if you consume them regularly? So these foods have been associated with an increased risk for asthma, obesity, type 2 diabetes, cancer, gastrointestinal disorders, depression, frailty, cardiovascular diseases, and it poses an increased risk for infection. There was actually a study conducted in the early 1970s that they took a group of healthy individuals and they gave them a high concentration of sugar and measured the neutrophils, which are one of the white blood cells. They measured the capacity of those white blood cells of engulfing bacteria, and it was decreased by 50% 2 hours after consuming a high amount of sugar. So we know that it can impact our immune system too. It's something that we are definitely trying to keep intact or optimize, especially during a pandemic. How about artificial sweeteners? So this came on board with the intention to help people lose weight because they wanted to maintain that sweet taste without the calories. So they were manipulating all these chemicals to achieve this result. But when they started doing studies following the populations or the individuals that consume these products regularly, what they are finding has nothing to do with what they were intending to achieve. So they're actually finding that people who routinely consume artificial sweeteners, they tend to weigh more. So it can increase the weight and waist circumference. So the concentration of weight more in the abdominal area. They are seeing higher incidence of obesity, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, cardiovascular events. So how can something that does not have any calories cause so much damage? So some of the proposed mechanisms that the researchers are trying to figure out, they see that those chemicals appear to interfere with our gut microbiome. So the bacteria that lives in our intestines, they can be negatively impacted by those chemicals. And because they are in charge of regulating so much of our metabolism, that can be one of the reasons of those bad side effects. Also, they see that as people consume those calorie-free foods, it actually tends to backfire and increase their appetite. So it decreases satiety, which is the same thing as saying it increases the appetite. So as people reach for a sugar-free drink, the body and the brain tends to compensate for the calories that are not coming with that drink and eat more of other things. Also, it seems to have a psychological impact that people think, oh, I saved so many calories on this thing, let me splurge and eat the other thing. And at the end, they tend to compensate for those calories that they were trying to be saving from consuming those products. And there was a very interesting study that actually looked at how those artificial sweeteners impact how your body processes carbohydrates. So they gave healthy individuals a sugar-free drink about an hour before a meal. And they saw that after consuming the sugar-free drink, their blood sugar during the meal was much higher than if they were not consuming the sugar-free drink. So it seems to impair also how your body processes carbohydrates. The specific mechanisms and reason is not fully known, but we know that it's not pointing in a good direction. Those are not natural products, so the message is really to avoid eating them. So now we have a question to quiz you. So since I mentioned those artificial sweeteners tend to be high intense sweeteners. So I have a question for you. I think most of you are familiar with stevia, right? So Angel's going to release the poll question for you. How many times do you think stevia is sweeter than table sugar? So you should see the question popping on your screen. So is it 2 times, 10 to 20 times, or 200 to 400 times? So I'm gonna have you take the poll. and submit your answer. And let's see if you guys get the answer right.
We have about 60% of people who have voted. So maybe 2 more seconds. And okay, we'll share the results.
So 62% said 10 to 20%, 5% said 2. I mean, let me start from the lower. So 5% of you said stevia is 2 times sweeter than table sugar. 62% of you said stevia is 10 to 20 times sweeter than table sugar. And 33% of you said 200 to 400 times. So the correct answer is 200 to 400 times. So that's why it's called a high intensity sweetener. Okay, and I was actually shocked by another one, the one that I said I never heard before. There is one of those sweeteners that is 20,000 times sweeter than sugar. It really blows my mind. How can they even measure how much sweeter a substance is? But they figured that out. So it's something that, you know, it seems to mess up with the signals that food normally send. So the best thing is to try to stay away from them. So let's look at how much sugar should we have per day. So it depends on which guidelines we are looking at. So the dietary guidelines for Americans suggest limiting added sugars to less than 10% of the calories you consume per day. And one of the problems with that, if somebody is consuming 2,000 calories a day, they could still get 200 of those calories from sugar according to this guideline. So that gives, you know, people the freedom even to drink a can of soda every day. You know, they could fit that much sugar. So the American Heart Association took a more prudent approach, and they suggest limiting added sugars to 9 teaspoons per day for most men, which is equivalent to 36 grams, and 6 teaspoons per day for most women and children over 2. And for children under 2, the recommendation across the board for many guidelines you look at is children under 2 should not have any added sugar, ideally. There are some studies and some professionals that recommend an even more strict approach of completely eliminating the intake of foods high in added sugar if you're trying to manage or especially reverse chronic diseases such as diabetes and cardiovascular disease. Because sugar can have an impact on inflammation, it can have an impact even in increasing cholesterol. So we need to be very careful with somebody that already has a chronic disease. They should be even more strict. Does the Bible have anything to say about sugars? It doesn't really mention the word sugar directly, but it mentions some foods that have sugar in them. So fruits is one of them. And we have no doubt that that's a health promoting food, you know, based on the science that we already shared. But also fruits were created by God before sin entered the world. And after sin entered the world, they remained. They were cultivated by God's people throughout history. And they're also mentioned as part of the dieting habits. So fruits, we have no doubt that those are beneficial for us. Manna is another food that is described as having the taste of wafers made with honey. So it gives me the impression that it may have a somewhat sweet taste. And this is what I consider a perfect food because God was sending daily during, you know, while his people were sojourning in the desert. So it gives an indication that it has somewhat sweet taste. And then we have honey, which is mentioned as something good when eaten in moderation. So we have this warning here. Yeah, honey is good, but don't eat too much, right? So that's where I see the balance here of, you know, the natural sugars, you know, in the the unprocessed foods, and honey tends to be a more concentrated form of sugar. It's actually classified as an added sugar if you're using in food preparation. So with this one, we see more of a warning as compared to fruits and manna in the Bible. But we can also gather other principles from the Bible applying to sugar in general, which are the principles of moderation, the principles of treating the body as a temple, and the principle of eating for the glory of God. And you have the Bible verses here as a reference. How about the Seventh-day Adventist health message? Do we have anything to say? So when we look at the writings of Ellen White, especially from the book, the compilation Counsels on Diet and Food, she speaks quite a bit about different types of sugar and, you know, the different warnings that she had, different counsel. So I kind of categorize in, you know, 4 main points, you know, but if there are other things, you know, the best thing is for each one of us to read and be familiar with the counseling. But she mentions that the free use of sugar can be a cause of diseases. On the other hand, she makes room for occasional simple desserts, and she mentions that those simple desserts would be things like simple pies, rice pudding, and plain cakes. She does mention fruits in several forms: fresh, dried. She mentions homemade juice and canned fruit, which they used to do as preparing for the winter time. So all of those are promoted, but fresh fruit is placed on the top in terms of health benefits. She mentions that she used a little sugar when canning her fruits just for the purpose of assisting with preservation. So I find that is a very balanced message. And again, the focus is really to promote health, but continue to enjoy the taste, the sweet taste that God gives us the ability to perceive. Honey, I didn't find that she mentions it too much in relation to food preparations, but she mentions that she uses a natural remedy for cough and difficulties with the throat. And she mixed it with eucalyptus oil. And she said that it helped with coughing. She mentions there was another person that she gave advice, and in his case, he mixed honey with lemon. And at home, we use it as a natural remedy often too when we have problems with, you know, any respiratory problems. It tends to help us. And there are studies too showing that it does help with cough. So we have science to back that up too. So when do you think we start loving sugar? So I suggest that it's from a very early age. Even when we consider, you know, breast milk has about 17 grams of sugar in a serving of 8 ounces. And that sugar is from lactose. And I found out that it's even more than cow's milk, which has about 12 grams of sugar in a serving of 8 ounces in the same, you know, the same form, lactose. Yeah, so we come enjoying that sweet taste, and I think God had a purpose in that, because that's a highly nutritious food. So he wanted the baby to desire and drink enough of that food for their growth and development. Then babies next are exposed to pureed fruits, so they continue, you know, to enjoy the sweet taste, and then they eventually move on to whole fruits. The damage really starts when they start to be exposed to sweets and morning cereals and juices, you know, and sweetened beverages and commercial cookies. And oftentimes adults think that kids are immune to the bad effects of unhealthy foods, but they're really creating habits for life. And we can see negative impact happening from an early age too. There is a very interesting group that I follow. It is called the Environmental Working Group. And they did a study on children's cereal. And they found that on average, children's cereal have more than 40% more sugars than adult cereals. So really the main goal here is that the food industry is trying to get those tiny individuals very addicted to that sweet taste, highly intensive sweet taste. So let's see how can we, you know, be more careful, especially when we're buying products, to try to minimize foods with added sugar. And then I'm going to show an example of one of those children's cereals so you can see how bad it can be. So the simplest thing to do when you're reading label, first off, obviously you want to identify what is the serving size, which is listed on the top, because everything else listed below is based on that serving size listed on the top, which in this example here is 1.5 cup. And when they use cup, they are talking about those measuring cups that we use, for recipes. So see, because we're talking about sugar, I'm going to jump straight to the sugar section here. So they are going to list total sugars, but out of the total sugars, they list how much of those are coming from added sugars. So that's the most important information to look at, because added sugars are the ones that have been associated with the bad outcomes for our health. So if you want to minimize your added sugar, the rule is when you're looking at this percentage daily value column here, anything that is 5% or less is considered low. Anything that is 20% or more is considered high. And anything in between is considered moderate, and you need to use your best judgment if it's closer to the low, closer to the high, based on how many servings you're planning to eat, based on your health goals, etc. So, but in general, trying to keep, buying products that are low in added sugars is the goal. So this one, as you can see, it meets the criteria because it's 4%, referring to the added sugars here. So let's look at this children's cereal. I think most of you, at least those of you who live in the US, are familiar with Captain Crunch. And I was like, oh, at least they have one that says it has berries. But I was like, okay, let me find the berries under the ingredients. And I read and I read and I read, and I found no berries. They mentioned berries, but there's no berries. There is these little things here colored with yellow 5, red 40, blue 1, and yellow 6. And if you read the small print, you see that what they really meant is not that it has berries, is that it has naturally and artificial flavors that they meant to call berry flavors, but there's no berries whatsoever here when you read the ingredients. So let's look at the sugar. Total sugar 16 grams. How much of this total sugar is coming from added sugar? All of it. So all the sugars in this children's cereal is coming from added sugar. And if you look at the percentage here, 32% of the daily value for an adult, because the 2,000 calories is based on, the adult's needs. So it's quite a bit of sugar, is meeting the criteria for a high added sugar products. Okay, how's the fiber looking? Not good at all. It's less than 1 gram, so it's 3%. And if you go back and you read the ingredients, sugar is the second ingredient, and ingredients are always listed in descending order by weight. So this product is basically, corn flour with sugar. And then you see sugar listed here again, another type, brown sugar. And you see all these artificial things added. So it's pretty sad, to see that this is the type of foods that a lot of kids are eating, for breakfast. So it's like they're eating dessert for breakfast. So again, just to make sure the message, it's very solidified. So when you look at the ingredients, they are listed in descending order by weight. So if sugar is listed as the first or second ingredient, or if you see different types of sugar listed, that product is high sugar, even before you go to look at the daily value. So as you look here, sugar is listed in second place. And then you find 3 types of sugar. Like I mentioned before, the food industry oftentimes uses many types of sugar. So when you look at the daily value here, if you eat 1 bar, it's 11% on the added sugar. If you eat the 2 bars, it's 23%. So it's a high sugar, if you eat the 2 bars. Pretty low in fiber too. So again, that's another food that we should not go for. And if you notice too, here they are listing as oats and honey. But does this product have more honey or more sugar? More sugar, right? Because sugar comes first. So if they want to be really truthful, they should say oats and sugar, right? Are they going to do that? Probably not. because they really want to attract people to buy the product, and really they use things that are perceived as healthier, you know, by the population. So how much sugar is meant by when you look at information in grams? So that can be a nice exercise, especially if you're going to do, you know, this joy of eating or the supper club in your church. And if you want to do little exercises to show how much sugar is in different products, each 4 grams equals a teaspoon. So for example, if you look at a can of Coke, a 12-ounce can has 39 grams of sugar. If you divide that by 4, you get to almost 10, right? So 10 teaspoons of sugar in 1 can of Coke. So that can be a nice visual for you to measure and show your kids or show adults too, right? A lot of people, unfortunately, drink those beverages frequently. And you can do the same math if you want to visually understand how much sugar is in different things. Each 4 grams equals a teaspoon. There was a very interesting work also done by this entity, the Center for Science and Public Interest. Every year they select the worst of the worst from restaurants, and they call it this Extreme Eating Award. So they award the dishes at major restaurant chains that are designed to add a notch to your belt and a blow to your heart. So that's how they name the award. So if you look at, you know, let's try to focus more on the sugar since this is the focus of this presentation. So if you were to consider the guidelines from the dietary guidelines for Americans, based on a 2,000 calorie, you know, the individual could consume 50 grams of sugar for the day. So if you look at this example here from BJ's Peanut Butter S'mores Pizookie, so you get enough sugar for almost 3 days, 135 grams. That would be the equivalent of eating an entire 14-ounce container of Häagen-Dazs chocolate ice cream, plus 2 cups of marshmallow fluff. And that's in one dessert. So, and let me move fast before you start salivating, because you know, it still does look good, right? So we need to move away from the temptation. All right, so we have a next poll question that Angel is going to release. Myth or fact? Eating too much sugar causes diabetes.
Okay, we have 60%, 70% almost have put in their votes. So again, if you have diabetes, you should avoid eating fruit because of its sugar content. Okay, let's share the results here.
Oh, actually, the question was that I meant was different than that. So okay, but I can explain. So I meant to say, because a lot of people have the misconception that eating too much sugar causes diabetes, right? So the majority of you said myth for the question that she rephrased as eating too much fruit causes diabetes. Yeah, so fruit has not been implicated in increasing the risk of diabetes. It's the opposite. But even sugar per se, you cannot say diabetes is just caused by one article of food. Diabetes is a multifactorial disease. So maybe in the future we can have a lecture on that, but we have evidence that actually a high fat diet is actually even worse than a high sugar diet for, you know, to increase the risk for diabetes. We do need to be still avoiding those added sugars, especially because when you look at those foods that are high in added sugars, they are also most of the time also high in saturated fats or high in fats in general. So that's why we call them empty calorie foods. The definition of empty calorie foods are foods that contain excess calories and little or no protein, vitamins or minerals, and significant calories from saturated fats and added sugar. So really the message is that we should start making healthy shifts. So instead of eating fruit products with added sugar, such as those bars that have a little fruit in the filling, move to the unprocessed fruit. Instead of consuming, desserts, frozen desserts, milkshakes. Oops. I think my other picture disappeared, but I was supposed to have a picture here of smoothies or shakes that you can do at home. Instead of eating, if you enjoy the flavor of banana, instead of eating banana bread, and here's an example of one slice of banana bread from Starbucks, 420 calories, just eat the banana, which is 120 calories. So you save quite a bit. And you can make quite a few recipes using the banana to sweeten your recipes. We're gonna feature actually 2 recipes that use banana as one of the sweeteners today. Also, instead of, oops, sorry, I think there's some pictures that didn't go through. But instead of using those processed morning cereals, instant oatmeal, processed granola, start making your own recipes too. And try to replace sugar in your recipes with dried fruits, dates, raisins, dried fruits in general, applesauce, bananas, fresh or frozen. They need to be ripe, to be sweet for you to replace sugar in your recipes. So that's what we use at home in our recipes. So I wanted to, before we jump into the break room session, so one of the recipes I'm going to be featuring today, I call it an ice cream because it's a nicer version of ice cream. I had just to, to make a little adjustment here because when I created the recipe originally, the serving size wasn't half a cup because the ice creams back then, the serving size wasn't half a cup, and I was trying to make a comparison. So I did some adjustments here just to be comparable with this other product here, because now most of ice creams have upgraded their serving size to 2/3 cup. So this other comparable product that I found that is a tropical ice cream from Haagen-Dazs has a pineapple coconut ice cream. A 2/3 cup would give you 290 calories. A 2/3 cup of my recipe, 160 calories. This other product here, let's go to the sugar because that's the ones I did the adjustment here. So this product here has 0 fiber with my recipe, 3 grams of fiber, which is 10% of your daily needs. The added sugar here in this recipe, 24 grams. Our recipe has 24 grams of total sugar, but added sugar is 0. So all the sugars added in this recipe is coming from the frozen fruits, which are mangoes, frozen bananas, guanabana, which is a fruit that people usually from South America or Latin America in general are more familiar with. But you can find the pulp. I also use the golden raisins, the healthy fat from Brazil nuts. And here you can see that the ingredients use, a lot of items high in saturated fat. And then most of the sugar here is coming from added sugar. So we have significantly, a significant improvement once you make your own desserts. Every presentation I like to recommend some things for you guys to watch at home to kind of complement the material. So this is a documentary that kind of goes along the topic we discussed today. Have any of you watched this documentary before? Set up? Yeah. Yeah, so it's an interesting documentary. It was released a few years ago, but it has an interesting discussion on sugar, how sugar is in so many things. So before we break into the small groups, just a quick review on the things that you guys should be discussing. And for some reason, some things didn't translate to my PowerPoint, but share if you have, how you're doing with your goals, if you had tried something that you learned from the last lecture, if you tried the recipe that we shared last month, which was the cashew spread, and share with your group if you learned something new today and if you plan to make a new SMART action plan based on what you learned. And the final message, and I even put in the article, is very important for us also to develop being sweet on the inside, right? So I have this saying in my office, you know, where I see patients for individual appointments, that it has a pineapple and has this written in the sign: be like a pineapple, stand tall, wear a crown, and be sweet on the inside. I think that's an important thing for us to cultivate as we talk about sugar too.